So our conversation today is about how we remember our loved ones and how we celebrate life. And this is tied to a workshop that's happening after the 11:15 at 12:30 on planning end-of-life things, primarily liturgy, but also the other kinds of things that you'd want to be thinking about as you think about the end of your own life, that, like everything else, is something we can plan for. Frankly, it's one of the few things we can guarantee is going to happen, right? We know for a fact that this will come to an end, so we can act like it. And we can have the courage to face that together. And you all have probably been a part of some of the wonderful services that happen here, the wonderful celebrations of life, many more than I have. So Horace is going to talk to you a little bit about how we do that and what you want to keep in mind. And we're here Horace is here, I'm not, to answer questions and to have a conversation about how we do this. Horace, can I let you start by framing it? And I'm going to figure out what's going on with my microphone. Is that all right?
Yeah. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming to this important conversation. As Winnie was speaking, I thought of one of our parishioners who is ready to go and wonders why God still has her here. And so, I'm having that pastoral conversation with her and trying to keep her encouraged. And even sometimes I'll ask the question to the person, why do you think you're still here? And so this person kept going on and even felt like, well, is this punishment? And finally I said, well, you can hold me to this. You're going to die. and so, and she laughed. And I think that we need to, we confront that. One of the gifts I received around death is being a chaplain. I was a hospice chaplain, and before that I was a medical center chaplain in Johnson City. And I had to get comfortable with death. I think our culture does not help us. And even in the Christian faith, as much as we talk about the Easter joy and that liturgy that we have at funerals, there is often difficulty with death. People avoid it. The grief support group, some of the members who are part of this church who are part of the grief support, they talk about how their friends will just ignore and will not bring it up because they think, well, this is going to make the person sad and they're just going to cry. And what's wrong with crying? Those are tears of healing and joy that we have with tears. And often you'll hear people apologize for I'm sorry when they start to cry. And again, that's part of, I think, the difficulty around death. So this is an opportunity. Some traditions, I think of Buddhism as they live in that space. They see that coming and they embrace it. And so embracing death, this doesn't mean that we don't like life, but we think about life that death is not the end, but life is changed. That's what we say in our faith tradition. So I think having this conversation, planning, all of those things help us become more comfortable with death.
So, Horace, thank you. When you're sitting with a family planning a celebration of life, so one of the reasons we're having this workshop is that such a painful conversation, right? I'm sure you all have been in that spot where there's so many practical things to take care of, and it's the last thing you have any energy for. Remembering, it's my grandmother's death anniversary was yesterday, so my family's been talking about this. Yeah. What would you want us to know as someone who does this often, in advance of imagining our own loved ones sitting at that table, trying to figure out what to do next? What would what are the questions they wish they had the answer to, or what are those?
Yeah, and I see this as a precursor to this afternoon. Yeah. So just a teaser. For those of you who are coming this afternoon, we want you to be there. We're just going to give a taste of what we'll go into more depth this afternoon. But when I sit with the family, first I like to And of course, there is the grief and there is the sadness because that person is gone out of our lives. And I certainly honor that. I do not believe that because of the Easter joy, we should ignore that reality that it's human to go through that pain. Jesus wept at the grave of Lazarus, his friend. So I think that's a model that God honors that sadness and those tears. That's part of how we've been made. So I sit with the family and I give them I hold space for them to cry. And one thing I did as a hospice chaplain, when I would go into the room, and after I'd been called to the room of the deceased, and the family members are there, I asked them to talk about what is one thing that is a memory that you are going to carry with you. What comes to mind when you think of this person? And so that tends to take them to a place of, wow, yes, I'm going to miss that, and that's what I think of my loved one in that way. And after we have some time for conversation to talk about this person, to honor this life in conversation, then we begin the work of how do we want to celebrate this life in a service. I'm a strong proponent of a service to honor and there are various ways people want to celebrate life, which if you're concerned about how your loved ones will remember you, this is why it's good to go ahead and put that in writing. It's a gift to them, and it's also a gift to you. Because as I said in the blurb about today, you don't have to worry about what they're going to do. Because I think if they really love you, they're going to honor what you've said, this is what you want. Even if it might be different from what they might have chosen. But it does give that relief. Because so many times we sit and they say, gosh, I don't know. I don't know whether she would have wanted that, or I don't know whether this is the right hymn, or these prayers to have remembrances or not. And so all of that, it's a way of walking through the service as the big part of how we're going to give tribute to this loved one. And usually by the end of that conversation, there is a settledness of, not that they're settled, but that they have been able to find some support in that moment of grief. And of course, prayer is always there as kind of bookends to that conversation.
So can I ask you just a hard question?
Sure.
What have you learned about death in doing this work? Sorry.
Yeah. She's serious. Heavy hitter here. I think what I've learned about death is it's this cycle. It's this cycle of life. And there is beauty. I don't think before I got real acquainted with death, doing it a lot, and I think it was around when I was a chaplain, which was great preparation for coming here. Little did I know I was going to be doing this so much. So thank God for hospice chaplaincy. But what I think about is how we are born into the world and how we leave the world. And in my pastoral care class, I talked about death in the sense of this full cycle. And in water, we're born into water and then the washing of the body, and we leave in water. And in the best of circumstances, we're born into love, and then we leave in love. So I've been able to think about death, not romanticize, I don't want to romanticize it, but also become more comfortable. Death can be, depending on how we leave here, can be a little scary sometimes if there's a lot of suffering. I remember preaching when I was at All Saints in Glen Rock, New Jersey, and I talked about how there's that fear that well, there may be fear because it's the unknown. We can believe what's there, but we don't have people coming back telling us what's on that side. And I remember one of the parishioners confronted me after my sermon and said, I disagree. I am not afraid. I'm not afraid to die. Now, I have some fear about what will happen between now and that time. And she did go through some suffering. She had cancer. And I think because as a heavy smoker, she was kind of realizing that might be. But she was saying that part kind of, made her a little uncomfortable. But the process, the death itself, when that time comes, she said she welcomed it.
And do you think that's something we should do? Should we be working on our fear of death? Like, should we be making peace with it? What do you think?
Well, I think so. We're people of faith. And so part of what we hear constantly in our worship is how we go through that period of how God carries us and God is with us to the end. And so that comfort there. And then we come and we bear one another's burdens. We are part of the support. I was at a funeral service of a former associate priest here, the Reverend Dr. John Westerhoff. And just being at that service. And so we come to these services and we honor this life and we believe that this person is at peace. This person is at rest. This person is, I like to say, in God's eternal embrace. So those things, I think, help us with comfort as we move toward that. And that's part of, and we have each other to help us, very much like a midwife, to guide us through that process, to talk about and to live into this good death or a holy death. And that's what we offer. We offer as priests of the church.
This is another hard one.
Yeah,
sorry.
Oh, wow. She's getting me ready.
Actually, I know people should give me a script, right? Oh. Yeah.
You want my questions?
Right. Yeah, I can do that. But I actually think we're all a little bit curious about this. Like, there has been so much death in the last couple of years. We've all been to and have been doing so many funerals. It's been a big part of all of our lives. I don't know anyone for whom that is not true. I'm curious about the ways you feel changed by that or influenced by the last couple of years.
Tired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's been a drain. My mom was concerned about me. She said, I think you need some counseling. You're doing all these funerals. Yeah. Fortunately, I have a great parish here. You all have been wonderful. Your prayers, I feel your prayers. I feel buoyant by your prayers. That buoyancy is what keeps me going, because I'm amazed that it's not just the service. First of all, it's the preparation of the service. It's actually preparing a homily and getting into the life of the person, meeting with the family, and then their emotions and carrying their burdens. We are called to bear one another's burdens. And that can be a lot of sorrows to carry. The pandemic, just when you think about almost 1 million people in a couple of years who died from COVID. So that's been hard for us to carry. And then our loved ones, the personal grief that many of you in this room have had to bear with that pall of the pandemic. So it's just been a heavy, heavy lift. So I think that we're learning how we need each other in times of death, that we cannot do this alone. And I think drawing from community and being there. So I pray, I have a strong prayer life. And so I'm praying to be able to be here for you all. Not only for the family members here, but you are part of the church family. And so you are there with the families as they go through this, and that we come together. And I think the beauty of a faith community is that we all show up. I remember being at a parish where not a lot of people came because they didn't know the person, but it doesn't matter. You're part of this community, and it's like a family. You show up, because I have heard so many family members talk about what strength they drew from having a church that was full, or people came to help them. And I've thanked some parishioners who were sort of like these professional funeral goers. So they're like, oh yeah, they're here again, and they're there. And that can be a lot, showing up. But just showing up, it means so much to family members. One of our parishioners who was well loved, lived a long time, and it was in the fall, so we were Delta and Omicron were just sort of right there, and people were still a little uncomfortable about coming into this space. But one of the sons of this beloved woman said he was disappointed. He thought more people would come to the service. He was looking for that. So I know that would have meant more he loved his mother. She was, really, a treasure in this church. And so sometimes, just know that people notice. That makes a difference when they can walk into this space, into the nave, and see these people are here for me, for my mother, for my father, for my loved one, my child.
It almost demonstrates how easily and quickly we get disconnected, right? Because if we'd all been in person, it wouldn't have happened that way, right? Yeah, if we had been consistently in person.
Right, which is one of the cruelties of the pandemic. Yeah. It was really for those who died when we were shut down. Yeah. For that year where we didn't assemble. And I was doing graveside services with 10, we could only have 10 outside. And how hard that was. 10 outside in masks. And it was just hard. I just heard one of our parishioners whose mom had passed away. She said that worked for her because it was simple, and to have a big service would have been harder for her. So that's the only twist I heard in that she said she was able to get through it because it was quick, very quickly done. And that was the only time, but for most, it was a hard time. One of my friends told his mom, he said, so I'm going to tell her she can't go now. She's going to have to hang in there because we need to have a full service.
How did that work out?
She's still here.
Well, there you go.
Hanging in there. Yes, and then what some did, they just, of course, put it off. But, that sometimes was really hard. I think of Herschel Allen. I remember giving him last rites on FaceTime while he was dying in the facility where he was. And Betsy was there, and also on the phone. It was on Good Friday. And he died on Holy Saturday of 20. His service was last summer. Wow. So to hold that grief, that's another thing. That the closure, it's delayed closure. And so that was another piece to this.
Actually, it takes me to the next question. So Elaine Pagels has in her book on the Gospel of Thomas. So the thesis of that book is that Thomas and John are in response to one another. They're in conversation. It's a great book. She starts out with, she had just, I think, learned of a cancer diagnosis, I think of her child, something just awful. And so goes for a run in New York and sticks her head in at Church of the Heavenly Rest, which is an Episcopal church, just because she was going by it. and they're lining up for the procession and starting the service. And she said the thought she had is that these people know something about death. And then she started to kind of look into the life of church, and then talks about the Gospels as basically being about death, right? So it kind of goes there. So I think that's actually a pretty accurate description of us. We are people who know something about death. These community, we don't run from it. But to what you were just saying, can you tell me a little bit about the spiritual and maybe psychological work of, and I don't want to overly emphasize the funeral, but the funeral is kind of where we work a lot of this out, right? That I guess that maybe I do mean funerals, but that kind of liturgy does.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why I really emphasize funerals. Because it kind of walks us through life. It's a whole cycle. It takes us from, it's the planning, it's the prayers, the beginning. Then we come into the church. We come into this place where there is sorrow. And then that liturgy holds us, the liturgy itself, that moves us, where we are remembering, we are thanking God for this life, we are giving honor, and we're giving back to God this lovely, loved one who we've had this time with. And then we, at the end, that wonderful commendation, which is some of the most beautiful words ever written in the English language, of a sheep of your own fold, a sinner of your own redeeming, and to give back to God this wonderful creation. And then we come into a repast or a reception, and that moves us toward life. So we've come through that, and then we go on to life. We don't stay there. So I do think that that's important. And in the planning, that is good to have. Because you mentioned the Gospels, but I think of Psalm 90 that tells us about planning for that time. And I just want to read just a portion of that. Psalm 93, you turn us back to dust and say, turn back, you mortals. For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, or like a watch in the night. You sweep them away. They are like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed. In the evening it fades and withers. For we are consumed by your anger. By your wrath we are overwhelmed. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your countenance. For all our days pass away under your wrath. Our years come to an end like a sigh. The days of our life are 70 years, or perhaps 80 if we're strong. Even then, their span is only toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. Who considers the power of your anger? Your wrath is as great as the fear that is due you. So teach us to count our days, that we may gain a wise heart. And in another version is, teach me to number my days, so that I may know my end.
That's beautiful.
Okay.
Well, we have a little bit of time for questions. I'm going to ask people who haven't asked a question. I'm going to just ask you to hang on for just a moment, but we'll do that. Are there questions? Neil.
Yes. You introduced us to the phrase, life is eternal and love is immortal. And that is a Benedictine prayer. And then Patty found the whole thing was fantastic for us when Jason got killed last summer. With the idea of life is eternal and love is immortal, I'm trying to figure out a word for not only Jason, but for all people that is other than the far as, for me, Jason is not lost, but somehow people say, well, I'm sorry that you lost Jason, or something like that. And I don't know what quite to say, and I don't believe that. And I find even myself maybe thinking that, not just about Jason, but anybody who has died. I have to catch myself to say, I'm sorry that you lost whatever. I really work hard about saying that, but I know absence, I know I'm missing, I know those words. So Winnie, what's another way to say something? Because loss does not seem appropriate, though convenient at times.
So I'll restate that a little bit for the just for the microphone.
Yeah,
right?
hard
So-
question to you.
No,
Thank you, Neil.
I'm passing that over to Horace. I'll restate it, and Horace will answer it. Right? I'm joking. So the Benedictine Prayers, I think it's the Anime Christi that ends with, close to the end, is that life is eternal and love is immortal. It actually said, that prayer begins with, we seem to give them back to you,
Yes.
right? Those who you have given to us. But I can't
It even
quote the
says
whole
we
thing.
did not lose them.
Right, but in their dying, we do not lose them. And so it's such a profound question, Neil, because the reason I use that prayer often, and the reason I do is I think it captures it completely, that we believe we come from God and we return to God. I believe it. It's not even that I believe it, I know it. Okay, it feels like a deep knowing to me. How we articulate what it means to not communicate with someone, to not literally have their physical presence, which is not a small thing. I don't feel that I've lost my grandmother, but I've lost my grandmother in some ways, in the ways I know how to relate to a person. So I think in some ways we hold that tension. I don't know the right word for that, but I agree with you. Jason isn't lost. Nothing of the truth of who Jason is and of his beautiful life is lost. It is all true. It is still true. Your love for him is still true. I'm going to pass it to Horace soon. I don't know the right word for it, but
Yeah.
we know this about people we've lost, right? I mean, it's not that all of the time we had with them disappears. It's not an illusion. You're not wrong, and it is very different to not be on the same plane, right? It is very different. And you're going to fix it, Horace. Go ahead.
No. I think that's really good. I agree. One thing I say, part of what I said earlier about talking with the family. What's the memory? What lights your life when you think of Jason, or when you think of your loved one, you think of Elkin, think of your dad. I say that because those memories that we have, we keep that person with us. We carry that person with us. There are so many things that are important so we don't lose that. We don't lose the memory. We don't lose that we carry them with us for the rest of our lives. And I think that's important to recognize. When the Children's Hospital was connected to the medical center in Johnson City, and the child care providers for that hospital did a wonderful thing that they had a mold where they would take the handprint of the deceased, say the grandfather, and they would talk with the kids and say, when you ever start feeling sad or missing, touching your grandpa, touch this. So that kind of something tangible. So again, ways that we find that person will continue to be in our lives, that it's not all lost. And, there are photographs, there are things that were done. So there are ways of keeping them with us, even though that physical, the body, is not there. So I think the loss is the loss of Jason not here in this room, sitting here in this chair. And that's a reality. And I think that's what I hear people saying. They don't want to come across as callous. They want to acknowledge it's hard because Jason is not in this world. but he's not lost, because there are many ways he is transformed into our lives, to your life.
We're not doing a good job of answering the questions. You'll have to ask us easier ones. That's a really tough one, Neil.
I think that was an excellent answer. I love that he's transformed into our lives. I mean, I think that is so beautifully said. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank God.
Yeah.
I just speak, and the
Yeah.
Spirit speaks. I can't take credit.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gail.
Well, and that, the thing about people that are gone is that we carry them, right? Like that it kind of, that legacy is for us,
Yeah,
right? That
Yes.
becomes our responsibility.
yeah. Yeah, and I think I said, this is the third forum I've done around this topic, that what I said earlier is talking about them too, and not pretending that when they're gone, we don't bring them up, we don't talk about them during holidays, we don't talk about those things that remind us of them, the good and the bad. Those things, gosh, when Uncle so-and-so, it would always irk me when he would say that. So, just talk about that. Remember, who do I sound like? Or just, your mom really loved this. She loved that. And don't be afraid to bring it up. I think that gives us more comfort. I think the more we do that, the more we can journey toward death in a very, embrace death in a way that sometimes I don't think we've done a good job at in our culture. One thing I thank my father for, who was a minister, Pentecostal minister. And one thing, we were in a small town in Florida, Stark, Florida, near Gainesville, Jacksonville. And we would go to the funeral home as kids, as small kids, and see the bodies. And I know we've moved, we don't see as many bodies today. We do cremation. We don't even have caskets in our church. I've been here almost 5 years, and there have been 2 caskets. And the last one it brings even though it can be really heavy, because you have that body present with the pall, but there is something there where it is a closure. But what he would do, my father, we would go and we would get excited. I mean, in a small town, you don't have a lot of things to do, so go to the funeral home. So we went to the funeral home, and so my brother and I would get our jackets, and we would get in the car, and Friday night we're going to the funeral home. And one thing, a gift that he gave me that he was not even preparing me for my lifelong work, is that the comfort with bodies. He would pick us up, and he would hold us over the casket, and he would talk to us. And we would see this person who, had been moving around, and the person is now there, like asleep, but we knew the person was not asleep, that this person had died. And they were very upfront about this, that teaching children that this is a reality of life. You die. And he would allow us to touch the body. He would hold us over and touch. I remember Joyce. I remember how this was in the 70s, she had the Afro puffs and a whole bit, and touching Joyce. I've been thinking about her. I was thinking of her earlier this week. And so I think that really helped a level of comfort, a level of familiarity, and to see that cycle.
You've been prepared for this your whole life.
I have.
Yeah.
I have.
And I apologize. Thank you for your response. I didn't mean to say that Horace wasn't answering well. In fact, these are hard questions to take on.
Oh, no, I didn't. No offense. No offense.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that at all. I apologize. Yes.
Neil, I'm very moved by the question. And it feels appropriate to mention John Westerhoff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember Sunday school class, remember when we used to meet down the street? And him talking about, in his academic way, the definition of heresy, and it was this tendency to collapse a distinction in one direction or another. And the example was whether Jesus was holding the tension. And it feels like that tension between losing your son and holding your son. I didn't expect to cry. But it's fine, right?
It's okay. Yes. Celebrate that.
So I mean, that sort of quest for certainty that those polls offer us, you know, I think is natural. But kind of being in that tension feels like where we're kind of called to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's to John.
Yes.
Let me see if I can restate that enough for people listening. So it's, she's raising up John Westerhoff's definition of a heresy, of collapsing the tension into one side or the other of these truths that we hold that are simply a tension, right? And that there is no way to resolve that. They're not supposed to be resolved, right? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Lewis.
Thank you, Josephine, for bringing up Westerhoff. Yesterday, when I gave Caroline Westerhoff a hug, I said, I love you, and John, and she said, I love you too, and John still loves you.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. The presence of both. And so I was there with so many of you yesterday to honor and to celebrate a life well lived, a ministry well offered. And people talked about so much he gave to the church, our diocese, his theology, prayers we still read, part of the liturgy, Eucharistic prayer that he wrote as a scholar, a priest. And I think so the best of our church. So again, that was a great, and he said, part of when he wrote, he said, I want celebration. I don't want sadness. I want celebration. So to celebrate the life. But their tears came when commendation always gets to me. I just think those words are so moving, and it's hard for me sometimes to get through that as a priest when I offer the commendation, because I just think of the beauty of that person. And when we give that person back to God, when we acknowledge this sheep of your own fold.
It's an interesting phrase, right? Do you have a question?
I did.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had a sister that had MS, and she worked with a hospital out in California, and she got a job dealing with people with terminal illnesses. And the one thing she said that she had a challenge with is the cycle of anger that somebody has experienced towards the end of life, knowing that they're dying, and knowing that they're leaving people behind, and the question is, God, why are they living and why am I dying? Why can't you just take me out of here right now? That kind of anger.
Yep.
Did you find that with people that were terminally ill? Did you experience that too, with hospice having to deal with that?
Let me restate that again for the microphone. So the question is about anger at the end of life, especially around terminal illness. Yeah.
Living are angry,
And have-
people that are dying are angry.
Yeah.
And everybody seems to have that sense of anger and grieving process too.
So Horace, the question is, have you encountered that? And what do you do with that?
I have not encountered, as a hospice chaplain, I did not. I understand that often when a person gets a really bad news and there's an impending death, there is anger. We've heard about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. That was one of those stages of, anger is after the denial, then that anger of the unfairness and that I'm going to why me? Sometimes that comes up. It doesn't always. I think part of getting people ready for a good death, and I've seen people who have been angry in life. I did hear about a neighbor dying cussing. But that. Yeah, and I'm thinking, wow, that's a pretty rough way to go. I think because part of it is trying to get people at a place of peace, and anger is part of that. And what I've experienced more is sadness. that if a mother, and this is actually a friend of my brother and sister-in-law, she's going to leave her children. And I think for parents who are going to leave children and not see them grow up, you can understand that sadness about that. And maybe some anger, but I think trying to get to a place of peace so that passage, as part of the holy good death, that can be a peaceful passing and not in this moment of turmoil. Doesn't always happen, but in my experience as a hospice chaplain, conversations that happened with the veterans, I was at a VA hospital, they tended to be, they were making peace with that. Even though with some of the veterans I found out, many of them took a while. They hung in there. I mean, toughness. And when you think of what in military, that kind of formation, I think that's why they could get to that point and then they would say, oh, not now. And I remember one veteran where family members were called in about 4 or 5 times. And it was kind of a joke among the chaplains because he would get, we were like, okay, this time it's going to take, and nope. It's just there. And I had one wife say, I don't know why he's still here. Because maybe you can talk, maybe there are some things that he saw that he did that he needs to say to a priest. And I went there and I talked with him about anything he needed to share. We had a good conversation and he died shortly after that.
I wonder if part of the answer to your question is often if someone's got a chaplain, like part of what you're doing is that work of moving people to the reality of that present, that death is coming, right? And
yeah.
probably-
Out of the anger. The anger is, I think to stay in that anger, what it does, the family, I think, will like some resolve. And they want to see that loved one. There is a peace that we try to move people toward. A peace, even if it's been a hard, and sometimes the pain that comes with the particular, if there's a disease, that could be very painful. Hospice is, the very forming of hospice was to give comfort in the dying. So it is to provide comfort. So I think it's to move people beyond the anger and the struggle toward a place of peace. And I think that's what I know, working with great nurses, great doctors, the medical staff, that is a goal that we try to achieve, to move people to that point. Realizing that there's a place for anger, but then there is that, we try to get them to that point of resolve.
Challenge that they face towards the end, isn't it? Don't you think? I mean, you were talking about working with veterans, and I know the U.S. Navy has a grieving pamphlet. It's called The Grieving of Samson, because Samson was like the mighty warrior in the Bible, and it's a little biblical pamphlet they put out about grieving, and the Navy guys love this pamphlet. I think you can get it through, go through the Pentagon.
Okay.
Network. You can probably
All
look
right.
it up. But I know it's through the U.S. Navy. It's called The Grieving of Samson, if you're still working with the veterans. But the greatest thing she said was dealing with the anger. And I said to her one time, before she passed, and I know what you're saying, it's hard to talk, but she said to me, I see your life, you're living it, you've got children, I don't. I said, love my children. I said, if that's what it means to help you get through life the rest of your days, enjoy them, as though they're yours. And whatever I could do to bring her to a place where she would receive, her life calling, the days that she had left, to be with us. And that was a challenge for me to walk with her as she walked home to meet the Lord. But the anger she held towards the end, she was like, I want to give up. I want to call this Kevorkian guy and just die. She was that determined. She wanted to face death. But I said, you have a purpose with us. You have to
Okay.
And, there's a reason that they're not gone, a reason why they're still here with us. And they have to work through that anger and that hurt with us. Because
All
you
right.
feel
We're gonna
we're
we're
losing you.
we're gonna have to wrap up the conversation again this week. We're gonna wrap it up. Yep, because we're at about 11 o'clock.
Yep.
So for this particular conversation, though, after the 11:15, again, I think the hilariously titled "Plan While You Can" is in this room, and there's a great workbook for it. It's a great thing to do in conversation, frankly, with others too. Don't feel isolated in this, and let's, please do take the time to plan something beautiful and leave for the people that love you a sense of what you want and what you value. So please do join us if you can. After the next service. And Horace, thank you. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.